Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Tuesday morning, January the 30th. We're still tracking, of course, a big storm that looks like it will impact California later this week, slide across the southern U.S. and reach the southeastern states during the early part of next week, probably that Monday to Tuesday time frame. It certainly can move northeast enough to impact parts of the mid-Atlantic region, and still several days to go before that event. Certainly there can be some changes that allow it to go farther to the north. We'll get into that in a few minutes. I thought we'd start off here by taking a look at the month of February. February begins on Thursday. I posted a long article yesterday at arcfieldweather.com on what I believe will happen during the month of February. Indeed, I believe the overall pattern evolves into one that's colder, remains stormy. Probably the colder pattern begins around the 10th or so of the month of February, and that colder pattern for much of the nation looks like it may last all the way into the month of March. And we'll talk about the reasons I believe that will take place here over the next several minutes. First of all, let's start off by looking at a very recent monthly forecast for the month of February from the ensemble run of the European model, taking the whole month as an average here as to the 500 millibar height anomaly pattern. And first of all, you can tell we have an active southern branch of the jet streak here, the overall jet stream, very active, typical of an El Nino year. And by the way, in yesterday's video, we talked about kind of a spurt of activity with respect to El Nino out across the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. That Southern Oscillation Index is tipping us off that there's kind of an intensification of El Nino right now. That is really juicing up this southern branch of the jet stream, and we'll have a stormy pattern over the first couple of weeks, certainly over the next couple of weeks, going into the middle part of February. And this is the overall pattern again for the month of February from the ensemble run of the European. So again, we have this storm track cutting across the southern U.S. California gets hit, then the storms roll across the southern states, and some of them certainly will likely make their way up along the Atlantic seaboard. At the same time, we have high latitude blocking right here centered over the central part of Canada. That is a pretty favorable position for some cold air masses to make their way from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. Let me kind of clear the deck here. Want to point out another feature. Right here we have high pressure ridging along the west coast of Canada up into Alaska. And this kind of a forecast map, this kind of a prediction here is supported by a lot of the teleconnection indices, and we'll go through those in a minute or two. Another feature that I've been, of course, tracking over the past couple of months is stratospheric warming over the polar region of the northern hemisphere, and we'll talk about that in a moment here. But again, this is the outlook by the European model, and I have confidence in something like this for the month of February. Well, before we get into some teleconnection indices with respect to the outlook for February, let's take a look here at the stratospheric temperatures. There has been an ongoing stratospheric warming event over the polar region of the northern hemisphere. It really got underway late December, kind of in two waves. Two bursts of warming have taken place over the last several weeks. That first one right here can be seen in that late November all the way to middle part of December time period. This is the timeline going across here on the bottom of this plot here. The red represents the actual temperatures at 10 millibars. It's way up at the top of the atmosphere, what we call the stratospheric level. Again, there was really like one burst of warming that took place late November to mid-December, and then a second burst in that warming over the polar region took place earlier this month, let's say early to middle part of January. Now, my experience in forecasting is that the stratospheric warming events tend to take several weeks to have an impact on the temperature pattern across the U.S., maybe in the order of 4 to 6 weeks. And by the way, I have an extended video on our Meteorology 101 page at the arcfieldweather.com website regarding this whole phenomenon of stratospheric warming. And I go over some historical stratospheric warming events, such as 1985, for example. That event, the warming took place in December. The real impact in the U.S. was mid-January. Some of you may recall, if you're old enough, the second inauguration of Ronald Reagan, for example, 1985, January of 1985. It was so cold in D.C. they called off all outdoor activities, and that was all related to a stratospheric warming event. My point is, it tends to take maybe 4 to 6 weeks to have the impact in the U.S. This particular event probably contributed largely to the big cold wave we had across much of the nation middle part of January, and I believe this second event here, this second burst of warming, will play a role, let's say, from mid-February all the way into the month of March. Well, now let's take a look at several teleconnection indices, and again, in order to give us an idea about the February weather across the nation. These teleconnection indices provide meteorologists with clues as to temperature, pressure patterns across different parts of the world, and we have had numerous decades of observations to kind of determine what trends could be in the U.S., for example, based on trends in these teleconnection indices. Basically, what's going on in one part of the world has an impact on another part of the world. So some of these teleconnection indices we talk about often here at arcfieldweather.com tell us what's going on right now over the North Atlantic, for example, or the Pacific Ocean, or in this particular case, the tropics. This is a map of the Madden-Julian oscillation, the MJO, that basically tracks a tropical disturbance, an area of thunderstorms along the tropical region of the globe. And it tends to form on a regular basis and propagate on a regular basis across the tropics. And the particular location, or what we call a phase of that tropical disturbance, is often correlated quite well with particular temperature and precipitation patterns across another part of the world. This map shows what is the computer forecast model, in this particular case the European model, prediction of the MJO over the next couple of weeks. And we see up here, this was issued at the end of January, and we can see, for example, day 15, day 20. This is taking us into the middle part of February, and you can see all these blue dots here representing the location of the European model for the MJO about day 15, and then the day 20 with these green dots. And this particular type of plot, the MJO rotates on a counterclockwise basis, so it's going basically in this direction here. And these little quadrants here represent phases or locations of where that tropical disturbance is across the Pacific Ocean. Phase 8 right here, for example, phase 1. So the bottom line here, this is the track of the MJO going well into the middle part of February, the latter part of February. It slides from what we call warmer phases this time of the year, 5, 6, and 7, into those colder phases of 8 and 1, at least by the middle part of February. I'm thinking, again, right around February 10th to 14th or so, this pattern change will take place. And this is a support for the idea of that pattern change to colder over much of the central and eastern U.S. by the time we get to that second or middle part, the second week or middle part of the month of February. Again, the MJO rotating into these colder phases by the middle part of February. Now, why do I say that phase 8, for example, is a colder pattern if the MJO is in that particular part of the Pacific Ocean? Well, this is a composite map for phase 8 during the winter time of the year. It's time dependent with respect to the season. In this case, of course, we're talking about the winter season. When the MJO is in that phase 8, this is a kind of a temperature pattern, temperature anomaly pattern you typically get colder than normal here in much of the eastern U.S. phase 1 just beyond phase 8 right here, showing a lot of colder than normal conditions pretty much across the nation. So again, this is these are the composite maps that give you an idea as to what a tropical disturbance can mean to the U.S. in terms of temperatures here during the winter season. So again, looks like by the middle part of February, we'll be sliding into these colder phases of phase 8 and phase 1. Now again, we're going to go through some more teleconnection indices here, again, all with the idea of giving us an idea of what to expect in the month of February. You know, if you're a stock market analyst, you know that they deal with a lot of technical analysis, terms like RSI, relative strength index, advance to decline, you know, Fibonacci curves, all that kind of stuff. They look at advance to decline ratio in order to try to give an idea as to where the stock market might be going. Well, meteorologists use these teleconnection indices to do the same thing, to kind of predict the future for the weather. In this particular case, we're looking at the potential weather across the U.S. based on what's going on in the Pacific Ocean. This particular teleconnection index gives us an idea of what's going on with the temperature and pressure patterns over the eastern Pacific Ocean. We'll take a look at some North Atlantic or Arctic teleconnection indices, and again, all with the idea of giving us a clue as to what's going to happen in the future here, in this particular case, the month of February. Well, this is February 1st right here, and this is the EPO, and it trends up in the very near term and then slides into negative territory and proceeds into negative territory for much of the month of February. This is based on the ensemble run of the European model a few days ago. A negative EPO generally is associated with high pressure ridging over places like Alaska. And what that tends to do is it cuts off the mild air that comes in off the Pacific Ocean into the west coast of Canada. It really kind of stops it in its tracks. So this is, in general, a sign for some colder weather pattern across certainly much of the central and eastern U.S. Here's yet another teleconnection index related to the Pacific Ocean. This is called the PNA. And again, I have more detailed information at arcfieldweather.com. This is a very long posting, detailed posting, as to why I believe we'll head into a colder overall weather pattern during the month of February, and it remains stormy also. When the PNA is in positive territory, that's generally associated with high pressure ridging across, let's say, the west coast of Canada, the west coast of the U.S. That in turn, like a negative EPO, tends to favor cold air masses that can make a move from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. Again, here's February 1st, and this generally stays in positive territory throughout the month of February. Again, more of a favorable type of pattern here based on these two teleconnection indices for cutting off that mild influx of air from the Pacific Ocean into the western part of the U.S. and Canada, which in turn allows more favorable conditions for cold air masses to make their way from Canada into the U.S. Now let's take a look at a couple of teleconnection indices related to the Arctic region or the North Atlantic region, all very important to the weather conditions in the wintertime across the U.S. Many of you are more familiar with these two indices, the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, and then the Arctic Oscillation. This is going forward in the month of February. Again, February 1st, beginning right here, slides into negative territory and generally stays in slightly negative territory through the month of February. That tends to be associated with high pressure ridging over, let's say, central Canada to Greenland, Iceland, maybe northeastern Canada as well. Again, in turn, that favors cold air masses making their way from northern Canada into the central and eastern U.S. And its closely related cousin, the Arctic Oscillation, also gives us a clue as to what's going on over the Arctic region, the North Atlantic, in terms of temperature and pressure pattern. It slides like the NAO into negative territory, and looks like it remains there for much of the month of February, when the NAO and Arctic Oscillations slide into negative territory this time of the year and stay in negative territory for a sustained period of time. That tends to lead to that high pressure ridging, higher heights than normal over places like Canada and Greenland, and high latitude blocking we often talk about here, which again in turn is a favorable pattern for cold air masses to make their way from Canada into the U.S. Well, one last chart here before we go to the current situation across the North American continent. This kind of shows those four teleconnection indices that we just talked about it in terms of the geographical importance here. We're talking about the NAO being in a negative phase for much of February, the AO negative phase, the PNA positive phase, and the EPO in a negative phase. And all of these are favorable for high latitude blocking. Basically, you may have a ridge up in this part of North America and blocking, setting up over central part of Canada, northeastern part of Canada, and all that in turn is more favorable for cold air masses making their way from Canada into the central and eastern U.S. So again, go back to this posting at arcfieldweather.com for more detailed information on all of this. Well, let's now focus in on that potential big storm that looks like it'll first hit California later this week and then slide across the southern states and impacting the southeastern U.S. Monday, Tuesday time frame, and we'll see what we're looking at in terms of how far to the north it can have an impact. Let's just go through these 500 millibar height anomaly forecast maps. This is using the ensemble run of the GFS from last night at 0Z. This is a kind of a clipper system that dives to the south and west of the I-95 corridor region in towards the Carolina coastline, and then upper level ridging takes over here over the north central states and into south central Canada. This is that high latitude blocking here. This is now at the end of the week here. We're now on February 2nd, which by the way happens to be Groundhog Day, so we'll see what Punxsutawney Phil has to say about February, my fellow Pennsylvania prognosticator. And here we go into the upcoming weekend, and here comes that bowling ball, that very strong upper level low. Again, first it'll pound away at California, then produce a lot of snowfall in those higher elevations of the Rocky Mountain states, as well as the Sierra Nevada mountains in eastern California. It slides to the east. Here we are on Saturday, and then we go into the latter part of the weekend and the early part of next week. And here we go by next Monday morning, February 5th. And a couple things I want to point out. First of all, we have this very, very strong upper level ridging here setting up over central Canada. Again, that's associated with a negative NAO, a negative AO. Here we are now 5 days into the month of February. Basically a strong block over central Canada. We have a strong upper level low off the Pacific coast and this one right here. And notice also this area right here, you have virtually no winds aloft on this particular, at this particular level of the atmosphere, 500 millibar level. When you have a kind of a blocking pattern like this, it's a hard prediction. It makes for a harder prediction as to where this thing ultimately ends up going. Does it go out like this, or does it indeed slide up the coast somewhat? And that, in my opinion, is certainly still on the table. Most of the computer forecast models at this particular time have kind of what we call a suppressed solution here, where this tends to go more to the east than to the northeast. I certainly believe the Carolinas and Virginia are absolutely in play for this particular system, maybe up a little bit farther into the southern part of the mid-Atlantic region. All it will take is a little bit of a push to the north of the ridging over the northeastern U.S. to allow this system to move a little bit farther to the north and east than is currently projected. Let's now clear the deck here, and we'll move forward here a little bit. And again, this particular model run has it sliding pretty suppressed environment here off to the east and not going up the coastline far at all. But I think this is still too far away to be certain about this. Whenever you have a blocking pattern, and this is a blocking pattern that what we call kind of the omega block right here. This is, again, we talked about this yesterday. It's kind of a classic omega block where the winds in the upper part of the atmosphere kind of flow along, mimicking the Greek letter omega, and it's a very slow moving weather pattern. Generally it's associated with strong upper level highs, strong upper level lows, and it kind of makes for hard predictions in terms of the movement of storm systems that that will be slow movers, and this will definitely be a slow mover. It'll move across the south central states and the southeast and only slowly move. We may be seeing some kind of a rotation around by that surface low pressure area during the early to middle part of next week, but certainly an omega type of blocking pattern setting up in the upper atmosphere. Now let's just quickly walk through the ensemble run of the GFS from last night at 0Z, and I want to push forward all the way into the early part of next week, and what we'll take a look at is the individual ensemble members of this particular run and where that storm system is projected to go at this particular time. And here we are into Sunday and finally into Monday morning. And first thing I want to point out here is notice this kind of kinkiness in the height pattern here, or it would show up the same on the surface isobar pattern here. This is associated with what we call cold air damming. Basically, you have strong high pressure up here. Cold air kind of slides to the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains, gets kind of locked in. And the bottom line here is this is telling me there will be plenty of cold air around, even for the southern part of the Mid-Atlantic region, if in fact the storm system does pull up to the north and east. But this is the outlook right now on the ensemble run of the GFS. And again, I think there's still time that all of this can move a little bit farther to the north. All it will take is a little bit of a relaxation of a northern branch jet stream over the northeastern part of the U.S., the southeastern part of Canada. In other words, a little bit of a retreatment back into southeastern Canada to allow this to go up to the north. Let's clear the deck, go out a little bit farther in time, and here we go. Cold air damming right here. Certainly monitor this closely if in the Carolina Mountains or the Virginia Mountains as well. Here we are all the way out to next Monday night and finally the next Tuesday. So let's wrap up with the surface forecast maps, and not much going on. A weak kind of a clipper system over the next couple of days, slide south and east towards the Carolina coastline. A pretty quiet weather pattern, and here we go with that storm system over the upcoming weekend. Slides across the Rocky Mountains. There'll be a lot of snow in those higher elevation locations, and this could also produce some severe weather down here in the deep south by the time we get to the latter part of the upcoming weekend and in the early part of next week. And again, this is based on one run, the 0Z run of the operational GFS last night. Here is that cold air damming showing up right here in the isobar pattern at the surface. In other words, high pressure up here, sending cold air down across the eastern side of the Appalachians. That could be setting up for a decent snowfall, those higher elevation locations of the Carolinas, maybe Virginia as well. Again, there's still time for this to go a little bit farther north than that. Let's clear the deck here and go out a little farther in time. Again, this is more of a suppressed solution by last night's GFS model run out to the east, and notice again it kind of rotated around here, that particular surface low pressure area. And again, whenever you have this strong blocking to the north, be on the lookout for some subtle changes here, and several days to go. We'll certainly monitor this over the next several days. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.